Welcome to Boring History for Relaxing channel. Tonight we slip into the cold, echoing hush of a medieval church in the dead of winter, when the world outside feels like it has been dipped in ice water and left to harden. You stand at the edge of a village lane, watching your own breath turn into little ghosts that vanish before they can finish a thought. The roofline rises ahead of you, dark against a starry sky, and the church windows hold a faint, tired glow like someone is rationing candlelight. You probably won't survive this, not because of dragons or war, but because your toes are about to learn what stone thinks about human comfort. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are listening from somewhere warm, go ahead and post your location and local time so we can all feel personally attacked together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach slowly because you're not just walking up to a building, you're walking up to a sacred space that also functions, in a pinch, as a kind of communal shelter. The wooden door is tall and thick, swollen from damp, banded with iron that looks like it has been there since the beginning of time and the end of patience. Your hand hesitates before the latch, partly from respect, partly because cold metal can bite like a small animal. When you finally touch it, you feel the sting shoot into your fingers, a quick reminder that winter has rules and you did not vote on them. Inside, the first sensation is not warmth, it is stillness. The air is calmer than outdoors, but it is also heavier, and it smells faintly of wax, old wood, and the mineral tang of stone that has held centuries of damp prayers. There is a dim light somewhere near the chancel, not bright enough to chase shadows away, just bright enough to give them better definition. Your footsteps sound too loud, and you shorten them, as if small steps might be quieter. That is not how acoustics works. But you try anyway because you are a human, and optimism is one of your core flaws. A figure moves near the side aisle, a clerk or sexton or simply someone tasked with keeping order when everyone else is asleep. You do not stride up like you own the place. You hover at a polite distance, hands visible, posture humble. In a medieval world, this is a language. You're saying, I'm not here to steal. I'm not here to cause scandal. I'm not here to test how fast you can swing a broom handle. Churches can offer sanctuary in the older sense of protection, and they can also offer something more practical on certain nights. A roof, a boundary, a bit of safety from wolves or thieves or simple cruelty of weather. The mainstream fact is that churches and churchyards often anchor medieval communities, and the parish church is not only a spiritual centre but a social one, a place where announcements happen, disputes simmer, and charity sometimes takes physical form. The person watching you asks questions with their eyes first. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you sick? Are you drunk? Are you going to start singing? You answer softly. You're travelling. The roads are bad. The cold is worse. You're asking to sleep inside, quietly, without trouble. You offer something if you have it. A small coin, a little food, a promise of labour at dawn. It is not exactly a hotel check-in. It is more like negotiating entry into a place that belongs to God, overseen by people who have to keep everyone else's faith, fear and gossip from boiling over. If you are lucky, your request is met with a tired nod that says yes, but also says do not make me regret this. Rules come quickly, because rules are warmth of a different kind. No sleeping too close to the altar, no open flames, no loud talking, no wandering. If there are valuables, you do not touch them. If there is a rope barrier, you do not step over it. If there is a relic, you do not breathe on it like it is a pastry cooling on a windowsill. You learn, in a few sentences, that your body is welcome, but your chaos is not. The church is a place of order, even when it functions as emergency shelter, and in winter emergencies arrive in a steady line. You take in the space as you are guided to the area that is acceptable. The nave stretches wide, the roof timbers high above like ribs of a great wooden beast. Stone pillars rise, and between them, shadows gather in pooled silence. Even with candlelight, corners remain private. Your eyes adjust slowly, and you notice the way soot stains climb near certain fixtures, and the way the floor stones shine where countless feet have polished them. The building is cold, yes, but it is also astonishingly present. It has weight. It has memory. It has a talent for making you feel temporary. There is a strange comfort in being told where to stand. You're not asked to explain your life story. You're not interrogated like a criminal. You're simply placed. You're given boundaries, and within them you may exist. For someone travelling in winter, that can feel like mercy, and yet the cold threads through everything, curling around your ankles, slipping under your cloak, living in the stone as if the stone breathes it out. You realise that shelter is not the same as warmth. Shelter is just the absence of wind, and winter can do a lot even without wind. This is where you make your first sleepy joke to yourself. Because you need a little levity. You have successfully escaped the outdoors, only to move into an indoor version of outdoors, complete with echoes. As you settle in, you notice other signs of nighttime life. A bundle of straw tucked near a wall, a folded cloak that is clearly not yours, the faint rustle of someone shifting in darkness, trying to find a position that does not punish their hips. You're not alone, and you do not pretend you are. You keep your movements small and careful. In a medieval church, nighttime is a delicate thing. It belongs to prayer, but it also belongs to need. Sometimes the same person embodies both. A poor widow might come for warmth and also for comfort. A traveller might come for safety and also for a kind of hope that feels sharper when your fingers are numb. Here is the quirky tidbit that floats around the edges of this experience. People in medieval Europe sometimes believed that certain churches, especially those associated with particular saints, offered more than spiritual comfort on dangerous nights. There are stories, repeated in different regions, of bells that drive off storms, of saints who protect sleepers from nightmares, of holy spaces that make harmful spirits hesitate at the threshold. Some of that is folklore stitched to real fear, and some of it is the human brain doing what it always does, turning uncertainty into narrative. You do not have to fully believe it to feel the appeal. When the night is cold enough to make you question your entire personality, the idea that a saint might also be a kind of invisible night watchman is, honestly, a soothing thought. Historians still argue whether the medieval idea of sanctuary was mainly a practical legal institution that communities tolerated, or whether ordinary people experienced it primarily as a sacred force that shaped behaviour, even when no law officer was present. Standing here, you feel both possibilities at once. The rules are real, enforced by humans with tired eyes. The sense of being watched by something larger than humans is also real, enforced by your own instinct to be careful in a place that humbles you. Your knees ache as you lower yourself, because you have been walking, and medieval life is not designed around ergonomic seating. You shift your cloak, tugging it closer. You test the floor with your palm, and the cold shocks you again. Like the church is reminding you who owns the temperature. You try another light joke, quieter, because you respect the sleeping and the sacred. If the point of spiritual discipline is to detach from worldly comfort. This floor is an overachiever. Your breath fogs faintly in the dim. The air tastes clean and dry compared to outdoors, and yet it carries the faint sweetness of old incense, the smell of damp wool, the ghost of last Sunday's congregation. At the door, the latch settles, and the outside sounds become distant. The village is quiet, as if every thatched roof is holding its breath. Inside, the church holds you in its vast, cold calm. You listen to the softest noises, a cough swallowed quickly, a foot scraping stone, the tiniest drip somewhere that seems impossibly loud in all this quiet. You make your third gentle joke to yourself. Not even really a joke. More of a sleepy observation. You have paid nothing, checked in with no paperwork, and still the accommodation has a strict dress code of shivering. You let your shoulders drop. You accept that tonight is not about comfort. Tonight is about endurance, about sharing space, about surviving winter the way countless ordinary people do. One careful breath at a time, under a roof that belongs to everyone and no one. You close your eyes, and the darkness behind your eyelids feels warmer than the air around you. Like your body is trying to create its own small sanctuary. You open your eyes to the kind of darkness that feels textured, as if the night has woven itself into cloth and draped it across the nave. The church is not silent. Not really. It just keeps its noises on a strict budget. Somewhere. Wood settles with a low, patient creak. A draught sighs through a crack you cannot see, and the sound rolls along the stone like a slow whisper. You lie still for a moment, because moving means waking every complaint in your body, and your body is already drafting a formal letter about the floor. You begin, very carefully, to figure out where you are allowed to exist. That is the first job of anyone sleeping in a medieval church during winter. Not getting in trouble. The sacred geography matters. The closer you get to the altar area, the more the space feels guarded, even if no one is standing there. You can see barriers in the dim, sometimes a low rail, sometimes a rope, sometimes simply a change in flooring that tells you, without words, that this is not your territory. The chancel is a place for clergy and ritual, and even an exhausted traveller understands that certain lines are not crossed unless you want to become tomorrow's village conversation. You shift onto an elbow, and your palm meets stone that feels like it has stored cold for centuries. You do not sit up quickly. You sit up like someone trying not to offend architecture. Your eyes adjust again, picking out shapes, pillars, benches, the outline of a side chapel, a niche where a statue stands with a calm face and a permanent immunity to discomfort. If you are hoping for a cozy corner, you learn quickly that corners come with trade-offs. A corner might shelter you from drafts, but it might also place you near a doorway used by clergy, or near storage, or near a spot where someone will walk in the night. You watch how other sleepers choose their places. This is a quiet form of education. A man wrapped in a worn cloak has arranged himself near a pillar, not pressed against it, but close enough that his back has a stable reference point. A woman has positioned herself where she can see the main door, which is a choice that makes sense if you have learned to sleep like a cat, half alert. Two youths have clustered together, sharing warmth with the kind of practicality that makes you respect them instantly. Nobody spreads out, nobody claims territory. Space inside is shared, and the unspoken rule is simple. Take up what you need, not what you want. There is also the matter of sight lines. You start to understand why people pick spots that are visible from certain angles. In medieval communities, reputation is not an abstract concept. It is a survival tool. If you sleep in a hidden nook, you may feel safer, but you also risk being suspected of doing something you are not doing. Being seen in the right way can be protection. It tells anyone passing through that you're simply resting, not prowling, not plotting, not preparing to make off with a candlestick. You do not want to be the mysterious figure in the shadows. You want to be the boring figure near a pillar. And boring is a compliment in this setting. The mainstream historical fact that presses itself into this moment is that parish churches are central public spaces, and their use is not limited to formal worship. People gather there for meetings, announcements, and sometimes for shelter, especially in harsh conditions or during travel. That does not mean everyone loves the idea of sleepers in the nave, but it does mean the building is part of the community's practical life, not just its spiritual ideal. You consider the floor. It is hard, obviously, but it is also uneven in a way that reminds you that medieval construction is not aiming for your spine's comfort. Certain slabs tilt slightly. Some areas are worn smoother by traffic. You test a few spots with your hand, and you learn that some stones feel colder than others. That is not magic, just the way damp and density and airflow interact. But your sleepy brain starts assigning personalities anyway. This slab is mean. That one is merely indifferent. You almost laugh, quietly, because you have reached the point where you are negotiating with flooring like it is a difficult relative at a holiday dinner. You decide to relocate slowly, making as little sound as possible. You gather your cloak, keep your boots close, and move in a careful crouch. You avoid the central aisle, because it is a path people will use. You avoid the very edges, because that is where drafts like to lurk. You aim for a spot near a pillar that is not too close to a wall. Pillars do something useful. They break airflow. They create a small pocket of relative calm. They also give you the psychological comfort of having something solid at your back, like a shield against the night. As you settle into your chosen place, you become aware of a different kind of boundary. the boundary between holy objects and ordinary bodies. In the dim, you can make out shapes that matter. A carved font for baptism, a lectern, perhaps a painted panel or a simple image of a saint. You keep your distance, as not only out of reverence, but out of common sense. Touching things draws attention. Attention draws questions. Questions lead to judgments. And judgments, in a small community, can cling to you longer than frost. Here is a quirky tidbit that flutters through the colder corners of medieval life. Some people believe that sleeping near certain saints' images could help with specific troubles, like fevers, nightmares, or persistent pain. There are accounts of people seeking healing by staying close to shrines or altars, hoping for a miracle. You, however, are not here to stage a dramatic cure. You are here to keep your ears from freezing off. Still, you can feel the human urge to place yourself near comfort. Even symbolic comfort. The glow of a candle near an image can feel warmer, even when it is not. The mind, exhausted and cold, is easily persuaded. Historians still argue whether popular piety in the medieval period is best understood as deeply church-directed, or as a more mixed landscape of local customs, folk beliefs, and personal strategies that happen to take place under church roofs. Looking at the sleeping bodies around you, you can sense both currents. Some people murmur prayers under their breath. Others say nothing, conserving energy. Some clutch a small token, maybe a wooden cross or a bead, as if gripping certainty. Others grip nothing at all, relying on wool and stubbornness. You pull your cloak tighter and notice how the fabric has its own smell, a mix of smoke, sweat, and road dust. It is not unpleasant, it is real. You arrange it so that your shoulders are covered and your feet are tucked in, because feet are traitors in winter. You discover that the most comfortable position is not exactly comfortable. It is simply the position that makes the least number of things hurt at once. Your hips complain, your neck complains, and your knees join in like they have been waiting for their turn. You try to make a small nest, using your bundle or any straw you can find that does not look like it belongs to someone else. Borrowing warmth is one thing. Borrowing bedding without permission is another. You keep your gear close, not because you expect theft, though it is always possible, but because having your things within reach reduces anxiety. Anxiety makes you move. Movement makes noise. Noise gets you noticed. It is a neat little chain of medieval logic. A soft footfall passes somewhere behind you, and you freeze, holding your breath like you're playing a game you did not sign up for. The figure, perhaps the person keeping watch, does not stop. There is no confrontation. The message is simple. You are being observed gently, like a parent checking that children are not doing something creative and regrettable. You exhale and let your shoulders loosen again. You settle your head down, eyes half closed. The pillar beside you is cold, but it blocks the faint push of air that flows along the wall. The church's darkness wraps around you in slow layers. You accept that sleep here is not a private act. It is a communal arrangement, a truce between need and reverence. You let your breathing slow, and you make one last sleepy joke in your mind, as if to keep yourself company. You have found a spot that is not warm, not soft, and not romantic, which means you have chosen the most historically accurate option available. You wake in the middle of the night with the sudden conviction that someone has placed a cold hand on your ribs. It takes a few slow breaths to realize the hand is not a hand. It is the church itself, pressing its winter into you through stone and air and pure indifference. Your cloak has shifted. A draught has found the exact seam where fabric meets skin. You lie there, eyes open, staring into darkness that feels taller than it should, and you listen to your own teeth consider becoming a percussion instrument. The first thing you learn, truly learn, is that stone does not just feel cold. Stone steals heat. It takes it quietly, like a tax collector who does not need to raise their voice. The floor draws warmth from your hips and shoulders. The pillar nearby gives you calm air, but it also radiates chill. Medieval churches are built to endure, to hold steady through summer and winter, to keep a kind of stable interior for worship. In deep winter, that stability can mean the inside stays cold long after the sun has tried. Briefly, to help. Your body is the only furnace you brought, and it is struggling to keep up. You shift, trying to find a position where less of you touches the ground. You tuck an arm under your chest, then regret it because your hand goes numb. You pull your knees closer, then regret it because your knees now ache. You finally settle into a compromise that feels like surrender. You accept pressure points as long as they are not freezing. This is not comfort. This is logistics. You sit up slowly, because your joints are stiff and you do not want to wake anyone. The air inside the church is colder than it was at dusk, or perhaps you are simply more aware now. Your breath turns visible in the faint light, a small cloud that dissolves almost immediately. You rub your hands together, then stop because the sound carries. Churches amplify everything, including the mild panic of a traveller trying to reassemble their circulation. You start to study the building like it is an opponent in a game you do not want to play. Where does the air move? Where does it pool? You notice that the cold is not evenly distributed. Near the main door, it is sharper. Near certain windows, it slides down like an invisible curtain. Along the floor, it flows in slow streams, as if the church has underground rivers made of winter. The higher you look, the more the darkness suggests height and emptiness. Warm air, if there is any, rises, but there is so much vertical space that it feels wasted. Your body, down on the ground, is living in the coldest layer. The mainstream historical fact embedded in this discomfort is that medieval churches often have high ceilings, thick masonry walls, and relatively small or poorly sealed openings compared to modern buildings, which makes them slow to heat and quick to feel chilly, especially when there is no constant fire. Even when fires exist nearby, the heat struggles to fill such large spaces. The design is not meant for sleeping travellers. It is meant for communal gathering, sound resonance, and a sense of awe, and it succeeds at those goals with almost insulting excellence. You test a few spots with your hand, quietly. The floor near the centre aisle is colder, possibly because it is more exposed to drafts that snake between doors and gaps. The floor nearer a cluster of wooden benches feels slightly less brutal, because wood does not pull heat away as fast as stone. You consider slipping onto a bench, then imagine the look you might get if someone wakes to find you sprawled where parishioners sit. You can almost hear the polite medieval version of, "Please stop treating our sacred seating like your personal nap platform." So you stay low. You work with what you have. You slide a fold of your cloak under your hip. You wedge your bag under your side to lift you off the stone by a fraction. It is amazing how much effort you will invest for a difference of one finger's thickness. You make a sleepy little joke to yourself about inventing a new luxury product. Air. But under your body, it is not your best work, but it keeps your mood from cracking. Your eyes wander to the walls and the way they feel alive in the dim, not moving, but full of presence. There are stains of smoke near certain fixtures. There are patches where damp has left darker shapes. There are places where the plaster or stone looks slightly different, a sign of repair. You realise the church has its own winter routine. Moisture creeps in, freezes, expands, loosens things, then thaws, then repeats. Maintenance is constant. The building is strong, but it is always negotiating with weather. Here is a quirky tidbit that medieval people sometimes repeat in different forms. Some believe that certain stones, especially those associated with holy places, carry protective qualities. There are stories of taking dust from a shrine stone as a remedy, or touching a particular pillar for luck. The church's stone is not just structure in the medieval imagination. It can be a participant in spiritual life. You, however, are mostly experiencing the stone as a professional thief of heat. If the stone is protective, it is protecting itself from your warmth with remarkable efficiency. You also begin to understand the role of drafts as something almost intentional. The church has gaps that allow air to move, because medieval buildings breathe. They are not sealed. That breathing helps with smoke, with damp, with the slow rot that can creep into wood. In winter, that breathing becomes a nuisance. A narrow crack can create a steady ribbon of cold that targets you with surprising accuracy. It is as if the church has learned your weak points and is testing them. Historians still argue whether medieval builders understood airflow and insulation in a systematic way, or whether they primarily relied on tradition and experience. Learning what worked by repeating what had been done before, in this moment, you suspect both. The church is not a random pile of stone, it is the result of choices. Yet those choices are aimed at worship and longevity, not at making sure a traveller can sleep without feeling like a frozen fish on a slab. You notice a spot near a wooden screen or partition where the air seems calmer. The screen breaks the flow. It creates a small pocket of stillness. You inch toward it, moving slowly, carefully, like you are sneaking past a sleeping dog. The sound of your clothing against stone seems loud in your own ears, but nobody stirs. You settle again, this time positioning your body so that your back is not directly exposed to the faint currents. You pull your cloak up around your neck, tucking the edge under your chin, and you realize you have become a human burrito, except the filling is regret. A mouse skitters somewhere, a quick scratch, then silence. Your mind, tired and cold, offers a dramatic interpretation, like you are being stalked by a tiny wolf. You then correct yourself because you are not here to panic. You are here to endure. Still, you keep your food tucked away because medieval mice have confidence. You try to warm your hands by breathing into them, and you learn that your breath is not hot enough to count as a heating system. It helps a little. You rub your fingers, you flex them. You imagine warmth like it is a story you once heard. You let your shoulders drop. You let your jaw unclench. You accept that the building will not change for you. You must change for it. As you lower yourself again, you find the smallest victory. Your new spot does not have that direct ribbon of cold on your ribs. The floor is still stone. The night is still winter, but the air is quieter here, less invasive. You allow yourself one last gentle joke, because even in misery you can be slightly amused. You have discovered a medieval version of interior design, and the theme is, avoid getting emotionally attached to body heat. Your eyes close, your breathing slows, you listen to the church's slow sounds, wood settling, faint wind outside, the almost inaudible tick of a candle being itself somewhere far away. In the dark, the building feels like a huge, cold animal that has decided to tolerate you for the night. You do not ask for affection. You settle for tolerance. That is enough. You wake to a different kind of discomfort. Not the sharp bite of cold, but the slow, nagging truth that your body has been negotiating with stone all night. Your shoulder feels like it has been pressed into a declaration of war. Your hip feels older than you. You blink, and the dimness is still there, though it has softened, as if the night is starting to thin at the edges. Your first thought is simple and practical. You need better insulation, and you need it without breaking rules or dignity. In a medieval winter, bedding is not a neat package you buy. It is a collection of materials, favours, and improvisation. Straw is the classic solution, because it traps air, and trapped air is what warmth looks like in real life. You scan the floor for any bundle that looks communal. Sometimes churches keep straw for practical reasons, for processions, for cleaning, for kneeling, for emergencies. Sometimes there is none, and you must rely on your own kit. If you find a little, you gather it carefully, not like you're harvesting a field, more like you're picking up what is clearly meant to be used. You also notice that many people's bedding is layered. A cloak over a tunic over a shirt over skin that is trying its best, a sack under the head, a folded garment under the ribs, a spare piece of cloth wrapped around feet. You begin to copy the logic. Medieval sleeping is often about layers, because you can adjust layers. You can pull them tighter, loosen them, fold them, shove them under pressure points, and create small pockets of warmth. You cannot do that with a single thin blanket and a lot of hope. The mainstream historical fact that guides your choices is that wool is a prized textile for cold conditions in medieval Europe. Wool retains warmth even when damp and is widely used in clothing and blankets when people can afford it. Linen is common for underlayers, but linen alone will not keep you warm. Fur exists too, especially in wealthier contexts, but it is not the default for every traveller. The best warmth is often a heavy wool cloak, because it functions as coat, blanket, and status symbol all at once. You check your own cloak like it is a teammate. Is it thick? Is it full length? Does it have holes? Does it smell like wet sheep? You might actually be grateful for the wet sheep smell because it suggests real wool, and real wool means survival. If your cloak is thin, you start considering trades and bargains. This is where medieval life becomes both humiliating and oddly straightforward. You can offer labour, you can offer a coin, you can offer a small item you can spare. In a church setting, you can also offer a donation, because charity is a currency with social meaning. You approach the caretaker again, or a nearby parishioner who seems awake, and you speak softly, because loudness in a church at night feels like a crime even if nobody says so. You ask if there is spare straw, or an old cloth, or anything that can be used under the body. You do not demand, you request. The answer might be no. The answer might be a gesture toward a corner where a pile of rushes rests. The answer might be a look that says, you can have this, but do not make it weird. If you are offered straw, you take it with gratitude. You spread it not too thick, because thick straw can be itchy and noisy, but enough to lift you off the stone. You arrange it in a rectangle, like you're setting a tiny bed for a person who has no right to be picky. You lie down briefly to test it, then adjust, because straw shifts. You tuck the edges in with your cloak. You learn that bedding is not a static object. It is a living mess that you must manage. Here is a quirky tidbit that sneaks into the margins of medieval bedding. In some regions, people use bundles of dried herbs or fragrant plants in sleeping areas, partly for scent, partly for pest deterrence, and partly because they believe certain smells can ward off illness or bad dreams. The line between practical and magical is not a line at all. It is a braid. You might catch a faint herbal smell near someone's head, something like lavender or sage or whatever grows locally, and you wonder if it helps. At minimum, it makes the air feel less like damp wool and human exhaustion. Historians still argue whether medieval people's daily experience of cold is best understood as a constant hardship they simply accepted, or whether they develop a wide range of small technologies and habits that make winter more manageable than we assume. Right now, you feel that second possibility. Even without modern heating, people know things. They know how to sleep close to others without starting fights. They know how to layer clothing. They know how to block drafts with cloth. They know how to keep feet covered. The knowledge is quiet, passed hand to hand. You focus on your feet, because feet decide the mood of the entire body. If your feet are cold, your brain refuses to relax. You wrap them in spare cloth if you have it. If you do not, you fold the end of your cloak over them like a tent. You tuck the fabric under your calves to keep it in place. If you have boots on, you consider loosening them slightly, because tight boots restrict circulation, and circulation is your only internal heater. But if you loosen too much, you risk losing warmth. You do the medieval calculation, comfort versus survival, with no calculator, just vibes. You also consider your head. A hat matters. A hood matters. If you have neither, you pull your cloak up and make a hood out of it. It looks silly, but winter does not grade style. You turn slightly so your breath does not condense directly onto your fabric near your face, because dampness near your mouth and nose can chill you. You're basically doing micro-engineering with cloth, and you're doing it in the dark. Half awake, like an overworked tailor, you notice another traveller nearby using an interesting trick. They have placed their bag under their upper back so the spine is lifted slightly, reducing contact with the cold stone. They have also placed a rolled garment under knees, which reduces strain. You copy it, adjusting your own bundle. You quietly congratulate yourself, not because it is genius, but because you have remembered that humans are allowed to learn from other humans. That is your first light joke of this section, and it is very gentle. You are participating in the medieval university of staring at strangers and borrowing their ideas. Warmth can also come from social arrangements. You see two people share a cloak like a shared roof. You see someone tuck a child closer, covering them with the best cloth they have. You do not intrude. You do not ask to join a huddle unless invited. But you understand the principle. Bodies generate heat, and shared heat is a form of community. In winter, Community is not always a warm hug in the emotional sense. It is sometimes just the practical decision to be near another human instead of freezing alone. The church's caretaker moves quietly at the edge of the nave, checking that no candle has fallen, that no one has wandered into forbidden space, that nobody is causing trouble. Their role is both spiritual and logistical. They might be the one who decides whether you get extra straw, whether you're tolerated, whether you're sent out. You keep your posture respectful. You keep your voice low. You keep your gratitude visible, because gratitude is another kind of insulation. It softens faces. It reduces suspicion. You settle onto your improved bedding, and the difference is immediate. Not warm, but less brutal. Your bones feel less pressed into stone. Your breath slows. You let your hands rest near your chest where they can steal warmth from your core. You let your shoulders drop. You feel the straw shift under you, and you accept the scratchiness as the price of being lifted off the floor. You add a second light joke, whispered in your head. Straw is the medieval version of a luxury mattress, and the customer reviews are mostly, "It is better than dying." As you close your eyes again, you notice the smell of straw mixing with wax and wool. It is earthy, dry, faintly sweet. The church feels less like an adversary and more like a container, a large shell holding small, fragile heat sources. You do not think about grand theology. You think about simple systems: straw under you, wool over you, air trapped between layers, feet wrapped, head covered, breath steady. You let sleep come with the careful patience of someone who knows winter does not offer quick kindness. Your third light joke, very soft, is for your own morale. You have upgraded your accommodations from icy stone to slightly less icy straw, and you would like to thank medieval supply chains for their excellent customer service. You do not wake because of light. You wake because the church has a voice at night and it keeps clearing its throat. A soft groan of timber, a faint rattle from a window lattice, the tiniest drip hitting stone with the confidence of a drumbeat. Your eyes open into dimness, and for a moment you cannot tell whether you are awake or just dreaming about being awake. Which is a very medieval way to spend a winter night, if we're being honest. The sounds arrive in layers. Wind outside pushes at the building, and the building answers with little complaints. Like an old ship in a storm. You hear the low whistle of air moving through a crack. You hear a mouse, or maybe several mice, negotiating their own nightly commute. You hear someone cough, and then try to swallow the cough back down, as if coughing is impolite. You hear a distant shuffle of fabric as a sleeper turns over. Each noise is small, but in a high-roofed stone space, small noises become important, like the church is gently amplifying the world's tiniest dramas. You listen for the bells, because bells are the loudest personality in any church. Even when they are not ringing, you can feel their presence, a kind of silent potential. In some places, a small bell might be used to mark a prayer hour or to signal the beginning of a service. In winter, sound carries in a sharper way. If a bell rings, it can feel like it cuts the air. You are not sure if it will happen tonight, but your body stays ready, as if bracing for a sudden announcement from a very heavy piece of metal. The mainstream historical fact that hums in this moment is that church life is structured around hours of prayer, and even in smaller parish settings. There can be routines that involve spoken or sung responses, bell signals, or candle tending during the night or very early morning. Not every village church runs full monastic hours, but the pattern of time marked by religious practice is part of medieval life, and the building itself is built to carry sound, when sound is meant to guide devotion. Acoustics are a feature, not an accident. Your mind tries to relax, but it keeps getting snagged on the noises. The drip becomes a metronome, the wind becomes a storyteller, the mouse becomes a tiny criminal. You catch yourself imagining a mouse wearing a hood and pretending to be a monk, and you almost smile. That is your first light joke for this section, and it is gentle. You're sharing sacred space with a creature that looks like it has never once confessed anything. A whisper reaches your ears, real or imagined. You turn your head slightly and see a figure near the edge of the nave, perhaps kneeling, perhaps sitting, perhaps simply holding still. Their lips move. You cannot hear words clearly, but you recognize the rhythm of prayer. It is not theatrical. It is intimate, like someone speaking quietly to someone they trust. The church at night holds more than sleepers. It holds those who come for quiet, for comfort, for a moment of control in a world that offers very little. You notice the candles. There are fewer than you might expect. Wax is not cheap. Lighting a church is a choice. A single candle near the chancel might burn low, watched by someone responsible, or protected in a lantern. The flame is small but stubborn, and you can see it flicker when the air shifts. The flicker changes shadows on the walls, making carved shapes look like they are moving. If you are tired enough, you might believe they are moving. If you are sensible, you blame the candle. Being sensible is hard at 2 a.m. while wrapped in wool and regret. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits this nighttime soundscape. Medieval people sometimes take the creaks and whispers of a church seriously, not just as building noises, but as signs of unseen presence. Some interpret strange sounds as reminders of the holy, or warnings, or the restless movement of spirits. In certain stories, churches at night are liminal places, where the boundary between ordinary life and the other world feels thinner. You do not have to be superstitious to understand why. In the dark, in the cold, when your breath hangs in the air, your imagination becomes an eager assistant. Historians still argue whether medieval belief in spirits and omens is primarily driven by church teaching that frames the world as filled with moral forces, or by older local traditions that persist alongside official doctrine. Listening in the dark, you can feel how both could be true. The building teaches reverence, the night teaches fear, the human mind does the rest. A sudden sound snaps you more awake. It is a sharper clack, like wood against stone, and it comes from near the door. Your heart jumps, and you hold your breath. Then you hear the softer sound of a footstep, careful, measured. Someone is moving through the church, maybe the caretaker checking the candle, maybe a late arrival seeking shelter, maybe a priest doing a quiet round. The footsteps are different from a thief's hurry. They are slow, deliberate. You feel a wave of relief, and you give yourself a second-light joke in your head. Your heart has just sprinted a full mile while the rest of you remains a bundled lump. The figure passes without incident. No confrontation, no alarm. The church returns to its low-budget noise. You settle again. Your eyelids grow heavy, then lift again when the drip changes rhythm, then lower again when the wind shifts. Sleep comes in fragments, like torn cloth. You doze, you wake, you doze again. Each time you drift, you sink into the soundscape as if it is a lullaby composed by stone, mice, and distant prayer. You find yourself focusing on one steady sound, breathing, not just your own, but the collective breathing of those sharing the space. It is faint, but it exists. A soft chorus of exhalations, some wheezy, some deep, some interrupted by coughs. In winter, breathing is a sign of life and a source of moisture. And in a crowded church, it can make the air feel slightly warmer, slightly heavier. You can almost sense the small heat each body releases. And you realise that the church is full of tiny furnaces trying to hold their flame. In a moment of half-sleep, you become aware of a different noise, fabric rustling as someone pulls a cloak tighter, a quiet sniff, the sound of a stomach settling. These are not dramatic sounds, but they are human sounds, and they make the vastness of the church feel less lonely. You're not a lone traveller facing winter. You're one of many bodies doing the same simple work of staying alive through the night. You shift slightly, careful not to make noise. The straw under you crackles faintly, and you pause, listening for any reaction. None comes. The sound is absorbed into the church's greater hush. You relax. You let your shoulders sink. You let your hands rest where they can stay warm. You let your jaw unclench, because clenching is just another way to lose energy. Your third light joke arrives, sleepy and quiet. You have paid for this concert of creaks and drips with nothing but your dignity, and the church has kindly provided front row acoustics. The joke fades as your mind softens. The candle flame flickers again, and the shadows move, slow and calm. The drip continues, patient. The wind sings at the edges. The mice do whatever mice do when humans pretend not to hear them. You allow your eyes to close for longer this time. You stop trying to control the noises and let them pass through you. The church, cold and huge, becomes a kind of nighttime ocean, and you float in it, held by wool, straw, and the steady rhythm of breath. You wake with a sudden, unpleasant clarity, the kind that arrives when you realize you might have done something wrong without meaning to. Your hand is resting near a boundary you did not notice in the dark, a small rail or rope that marks off space. You pull your hand back as if the rope is hot. It is not hot. Nothing in this place is hot. But the feeling is the same, a quick flash of, do not touch that. In a medieval church, sacredness is mapped onto objects and areas in ways that shape behaviour. Some of it is formal, like the altar area reserved for clergy. Some of it is local, like a particular image that villagers treat with extra reverence because it is tied to a story or a vow. Even if you are not an expert, you can sense where the invisible lines are. People do not step casually into certain zones. They do not sit on certain steps. They do not lean on certain furnishings. If they do it with purpose and a careful posture, not with the loose slouch of someone waiting for a bus. You sit up slowly and look around. In the dim, you notice small details that make the rules feel real. A cloth draped over a rail, a candle set in a specific place, a small table with a book or a vessel, a stand that looks like it has been handled only by certain hands. You realize that your body, in its search for warmth and comfort, is always at risk of drifting into the wrong space. It is not that you intend disrespect. It is that you are tired, cold, and humans spread out when they're exhausted. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval churches contain zones with different levels of access and meaning, and the chancel area is commonly separated from the nave, with clergy and lay people having different roles and boundaries during services. This separation is not only architectural but social. It teaches people where they belong, and it also teaches them that certain actions, even simple ones, can be read as irreverent if done in the wrong place. You become aware of your own small nervous habits. You rub your hands, you adjust your cloak, you glance toward the chancel as if it might glare at you. You decide to make your movements even smaller. It is not fear exactly. It is awareness of being in a place where meaning sticks to everything. If you knock something over, you are not just clumsy. You are clumsy inside a holy room, and that is a different category of clumsy. A caretaker moves quietly along the side aisle, checking the candle and making sure nothing has shifted. They pause when they see you awake. Their eyes take in your posture, your belongings, the distance between you and the marked boundary. They do not scold you. They simply watch, and that is enough to make you sit a little straighter. You offer a small nod that says, "I understand. I am trying." The caretaker's expression softens by a fraction, and they move on. You notice other sleepers who have learned the rules so well their bodies obey without thinking. A man keeps his feet tucked, not pointing them toward the chancel, because some people consider that rude. A woman keeps her bundle close, not spread across the aisle. Someone who wakes to cough covers their mouth quickly, then turns their face away from sacred objects, as if even breath should not be wasted on them. These are not universal rules written down somewhere. They are cultural habits, passed through watching and correction. Here is a quirky tidbit that hovers in the background. In many medieval communities, people treat relics with intense reverence, believing they carry holy power, and that power can be both protective and dangerous if approached wrongly. Stories circulate about miracles, but also about punishment for disrespect. Even if you never see a relic directly, the knowledge that relics might be present shapes the atmosphere. It adds a kind of quiet tension. You might think you are just near a decorated box or a niche, but someone else might think you are near the bone of a saint, and the difference matters. Historians still argue whether popular belief in relic power is driven more by genuine spiritual experience and communal storytelling, or by institutional encouragement that reinforces church authority. Sitting in the cold, you feel how belief becomes a social force regardless of its origin. People behave carefully because everyone else behaves carefully. The rules become real through repetition. You realize you need to handle another risk, nervous mistakes. When you are cold, you fumble, When you fumble, you drop things. Dropping things in a church at night can sound like a thunderclap. You check your belongings and arrange them to reduce risk. You tie a strap. You tuck a loose item into a pouch. You place anything hard or noisy on cloth, so if it shifts, it will not clatter. You are basically doing medieval stealth mode, not to be sneaky, but to be respectful. Your stomach growls. The sound feels embarrassingly loud, like your body is making an announcement to the congregation of shadows. You press a hand lightly against your belly as if you can hush it. That is your first light joke of the section, because you need to keep things gentle. Congratulations! Your hunger has decided to give a sermon. A different sound follows, softer, like someone whispering near the front. You strain your ears and catch fragments of Latin or prayers, murmured by someone awake. It reminds you that this is not just a shelter. It is a working spiritual place, even at night. The caretaker might be preparing something, or a priest might be checking the altar cloth, or someone might be tending a lamp. You do not stare. Staring is a kind of intrusion. You keep your gaze low and your posture calm. You think about what counts as disrespect, and you realize it is not always about intention. It is about appearance, about symbolism. Stepping into the wrong place can look like you're claiming it. Touching an object can look like you're taking it. Lounging can look like you are trivializing the sacred. Even sleeping can be complicated. Some people might see sleepers as needy and deserving of charity. Others might see them as disorderly. You're walking a thin line, and the line is made of other people's judgments. You adjust your cloak again, slower this time, and you make sure your boots are placed neatly, not kicked off like you are in your own home. You keep your head covered, you keep your hands visible. You are making yourself legible as harmless. The medieval world is full of quick assumptions, and you want the safest assumption available. You notice a small basin of water near the entrance. Perhaps for holy water. You do not touch it. You're thirsty, but you're not that thirsty. You imagine the caretaker's face if you drink from it. That is your second light joke, and it is private. Nothing says spiritual renewal like using the holy water as your personal winter beverage. A sleeper nearby stirs, and you hear them mumble something that sounds like a prayer, then drift back into stillness. It is a reminder that boundaries are not only external, they are internal. People carry a sense of sacredness in their own habits. Even half asleep, they orient themselves toward what they believe matters. Your third light joke is softer, more of a sigh. You're trying to be the most polite frozen person in the building, and you suspect politeness might actually be another way to keep warm, because it keeps you from doing anything that would get you thrown into the night. You settle again, careful with your limbs. You keep your body within your own small rectangle of bedding. You let your breathing slow. You accept the church's rules as part of the night, like wind or stone. The boundaries become a kind of structure you can lean on or mentally. Even if you cannot lean on the rail, you close your eyes with a sense of relief, not because you are comfortable, but because you are not in trouble. In winter, that counts as a win. You wake to movement that feels purposeful rather than accidental. It is not the random shifting of sleepers. It is the soft rhythm of people who know exactly where they are going. A faint shuffle of footsteps, then the gentle scrape of something wooden being adjusted. The air changes too, carrying a whisper of warm wax and smoke as a candle is lifted or shielded. You keep your eyes half closed at first, because fully waking in the cold feels like agreeing to an argument. A small cluster of figures moves near the chancel, and even from a distance you can tell they belong there. Their pace is calm, their posture is practiced, their clothing, though still humble in a rural setting, has a different shape, a different drape. They are not bundled like travellers trying to survive. They are layered like people who must perform tasks with their hands and voices. Someone carries a light, someone carries a book, someone pauses at a rail, waiting. The church does not become bright, but it becomes active, and the activity feels like a quiet machine starting up. The mainstream historical fact threaded through this scene is that medieval religious life often includes services at set times, and in monastic contexts especially. The night is divided into prayer offices. Parish churches are not always running full monastic hours, yet the pattern of night devotion, early prayers, and the marking of time by church practice can still appear, especially on feast days, in larger churches, or when a priest keeps a routine. For you, half awake on straw, it means the night is not a single uninterrupted block. It has internal landmarks. You hear Latin, or something like it, a murmured cadence that rises and falls. You might not understand the words, but you recognize the shape of repetition, the call and response, the way a phrase can be answered by another phrase like a gentle echo. You also hear the occasional small cough, and it reminds you that even clergy have throats, and winter is not impressed by vocation. The sound is soothing in a strange way. It is structured. It is predictable. It gives the dark a spine. Your eyes open a little more, and you see candlelight flicker along stone, throwing softer light across carved details you did not notice earlier. The edges of a pillar become warm gold for a moment, then fade. A painted surface catches the light and looks briefly alive. The church seems less like a cavern and more like a room with a purpose, as if the building appreciates being used for what it was built for. Even if that use involves people whispering at unreasonable hours, you try to stay still, partly out of respect, partly because moving would draw attention. But your body has its own agenda. Your hands want to rub together, your feet want to curl, your shoulders want to hunch. You do what you can quietly. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and hold them against your chest. You pull your cloak closer to your neck. You breathe slowly, trying not to let your breath sound loud. In a church, even breathing can feel like a performance. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits this half-dreaming moment. In medieval culture, people sometimes believe that being present, even passively, during prayers at certain hours brings spiritual benefit. The idea of earning merit through proximity to devotion floats around, especially near shrines or during special times. You're not here to collect merit points like a game, but you cannot help feeling that the murmured prayers wrap around you like an extra layer. It might be psychological, it might be spiritual, it might just be the comfort of human voices in a cold room. Either way, your mind softens. Historians still argue whether the spiritual experience of ordinary lay people in medieval churches is primarily shaped by formal liturgy that they do not fully understand, or by sensory participation, such as sound, light, smell, and gesture, that communicates meaning beyond words. You can feel the debate inside your own body. You do not understand the Latin, but you understand the rhythm. You do not know every rule, but you know when a space feels solemn. You absorb meaning through candlelight and hush. A bell rings, not the huge bell in the tower, but a smaller one, a light sound like a silver pebble dropped into water. It startles you anyway. Your heart gives a tiny leap, then settles. That is your first light joke, whispered in your head. You have just been spiritually jump-scared by a bell the size of a snack. The service continues. You hear pages turning, a sound that is oddly intimate, because pages are delicate and this night is harsh. You hear a voice rise slightly, then fall, then pause. You hear a response from another voice, softer. The voices do not aim for performance, they aim for steadiness. There is a humility to it. In winter, steadiness is a form of bravery. Your eyes drift closed again, and you begin to slip into that strange state where the words of prayer mingle with your own thoughts. You dream fragments. You dream of walking through snow while someone chants behind you. You dream of candle flames turning into stars. You dream of your own breath becoming smoke that writes letters in the air. Each time you almost fall fully asleep, a small sound pulls you back, and you hover in the middle, neither awake nor fully gone. You notice the scent of wax more strongly now. Candle smoke has a particular smell, faintly sweet and faintly bitter. It mixes with the cold, making the air feel thicker. For a moment you think of modern heating and how it dries the air, and you almost laugh. That is your second light joke. You're experiencing an authentic medieval humidifier, and the brand name is Candle. A figure moves closer, not toward you, but along the aisle. They carry something, perhaps a small container, perhaps a cloth. They pass by without looking at you. You feel relieved. You also feel oddly invisible, like a piece of furniture. In this moment, being furniture is a compliment. Furniture does not get questioned. Then, unexpectedly, you catch a sound that is not part of the service. It is the soft sob of someone trying to hide it. You open your eyes slightly and see a person kneeling in the shadows, not among the clergy, but near a side chapel. Their shoulders tremble. They are not loud. They are trying to be private in a public space. The church at night holds not only ritual, but raw human emotion. This person might be grieving, they might be frightened, they might be asking for help. You do not intrude, you simply witness, quietly, and you feel the strange intimacy of sharing a roof with someone's sorrow. This is where the night service becomes more than background. It becomes a reminder that medieval life is often lived close to death, close to illness, close to uncertainty, and the church is where people bring that closeness. Even a traveller on the floor can sense it. Historians still argue whether the emotional draw of the medieval church lies more in its promise of divine order or in its role as a social container for grief, hope, and communal identity. Watching that kneeling figure, you can see both. The prayers provide order, the space provides permission to feel, the voices near the chancel quiet. A pause stretches, then the murmuring resumes, softer, as if the service is turning toward its end. The small bell rings again, and this time you do not jump. You breathe with it. You let it be part of the soundscape. Your third light joke arrives like a sleepy shrug. You have attended a midnight service without intending to, and you did not even get a program. But at least the acoustics are excellent. The figures move away, candles dimming as they are lowered or covered. The church returns to deeper shadow. The ritual energy fades, but it leaves a residue, a sense that time has been marked, that the night has been shaped. You lie still, eyes closed, and you let your mind drift again, carried by the last faint echoes of prayer. You wake with a craving that feels almost embarrassing in its simplicity. Heat, not spiritual warmth, not emotional comfort, just plain. Physical heat that makes fingers bend easily and makes breath stop stinging. Your body wants it the way a thirsty person wants water. You lie still for a moment, listening, checking whether the church is quiet enough to let you move without becoming the night's main character. There is no fireplace in the nave. There is no glowing hearth tucked behind a pillar. The building is not designed for open fires in the main space, and even if someone wanted to, smoke would cling to the roof, and soot would stain everything. Also, the church is made of wood as well as stone, and medieval people have a healthy respect for how quickly a stray ember can turn into a disaster. The mainstream historical fact you bump into here is that heating large stone churches is difficult without modern systems, and open fires are generally restricted or avoided in many parts of the church due to fire risk and reverence. Warmth, when it exists, tends to come from bodies, from limited candlelight, and from smaller controlled sources. You sit up slowly and scan for light. A candle burns somewhere, maybe near a side chapel, maybe in a lantern. The flame is small, and the warmth it produces is almost laughable at this distance. Still, candlelight has a psychological heat. It suggests life, it suggests attention, it suggests that someone is awake and tending something. You find yourself wanting to inch closer, not to the sacred core, but to the idea of a warmer zone, even if the temperature change is mostly imaginary. You also notice a lantern, perhaps held by the caretaker or set on a stand. Lanterns can trap heat slightly and shield flame from drafts. If a lantern is present, it might be part of the church's practical toolkit, used for night checks or early services. You watch how the light is managed. The flame is never left unattended. The lantern is moved with care. Wax and oil are resources, not decorations. You understand why nobody is scattering candles around like festive winter lights. Medieval budgets do not do whimsy. A caretaker passes, and you gather the courage to ask, quietly, whether there is any place less cold, any nook where a small warming container might be used safely. You do not demand fire. You do not ask for miracles. You ask for permission. Permission is the real currency here. The caretaker gives you a look that sees you and everyone else, and then points, not to a fire, but to a spot where the air seems slightly calmer, perhaps near a wooden partition or near a cluster of pews. It is not warm, it is merely less punishing. You move carefully, Sus, because you are not the only sleeper, and stepping on someone is a quick way to become disliked. You shuffle along, placing your feet deliberately, feeling for stone edges. Your breath puffs in small clouds. The spot the caretaker indicated is not magical, but it does block the most aggressive drafts. You settle there and notice that the wooden surfaces nearby feel less cold than stone. You place your hand briefly on wood and feel the difference. Wood is not warm, but it is not a heat thief in the same way. Your fingers relax slightly, and you feel a small wave of gratitude toward trees, which is a strange medieval thought. But winter encourages strange gratitude. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits your heat craving. In many medieval households, people use warming pans or heated stones wrapped in cloth to warm beds, especially where fires exist but bedrooms are cold. The idea is simple: heat an object near a fire, then bring it to the sleeping area. In a church, you do not have a household hearth, and you cannot just heat stones in the nave. But the concept explains why some travellers might carry small tricks, like a piece of cloth meant to wrap a warmed object, or a small container designed to hold embers safely. Such items are not universal, but they exist in a world where people must invent warmth. You do not have access to a hearth. You do have access to your own body heat, and you decide to manage it more deliberately. You eat a small piece of food if you have it, because digestion produces heat. Even a bite of bread can make your core feel slightly more alive. You drink if you can, because dehydration makes cold feel worse, but you do not gulp, because cold water can chill you. You sip, slowly, and you keep the container wrapped in cloth so it does not freeze as quickly. This is not comfort, this is strategy. Historians still argue how much medieval cold exposure shaped health outcomes compared to factors like diet, crowding, and disease, and whether the body's adaptation to cold was stronger in populations accustomed to it. Sitting here, you can feel both possibilities. Your body can endure a lot, but it also feels fragile, and the line between enduring and suffering is thin. You try another approach to warmth. Movement. Not big movement. Not pacing, because that would be rude and suspicious. Small movement. You wiggle toes inside boots. You flex calves. You roll shoulders slowly. You clench and unclench fists inside sleeves. These micro movements pump blood and make heat. You look ridiculous if anyone watches, like a person doing silent exercises in the dark. But winter does not care about your dignity. That is your first light joke. You're doing a medieval fitness routine called, "Please let my fingers keep functioning." You also learn that warmth is social. You notice a cluster of sleepers closer together, and you realize they are creating a shared pocket of heat. You do not insert yourself, because that would be awkward and also potentially unwelcome. But you observe how they position cloaks like overlapping roofs, how they turn slightly inward, how they keep elbows tucked. It is not sentimental. It is physics. A small sound draws your attention. The caretaker is adjusting a hanging cloth near a doorway, perhaps to reduce drafts. You realize that even in a church, people use simple draft blocking techniques. A curtain, a screen, a cloth stuffed into a gap. These are medieval hacks, practical and quiet. The building breathes, but it can be coached to breathe less aggressively in winter. Your mind wanders to the idea of lighting more candles for warmth, and you immediately realize how silly that is. A candle's heat output is small, and the cost is high. You imagine trying to heat the nave with candles and ending up with 1,000 tiny flames and still cold toes. That is your second light joke. You could turn the church into a glowing lantern and still be shivering, which is impressive in the worst way. You settle down again, using your improved spot near wood to reduce the worst heat loss. You tuck your cloak tightly and focus on keeping your core warm, because core warmth protects everything else. You place hands near your chest, you tuck chin down, you breathe through your nose if you can, because it warms air slightly before it hits your throat. You let your breathing slow and even out. Then you notice a subtle change. The air near your face feels slightly less sharp. Not warm, but less biting. Your body has recovered a bit. The micro movements, the food, the sheltered spot, all combine into a small improvement. You cling to that improvement like it is a treasure. In winter, A small improvement is a treasure. Historians still argue whether the church's role as a refuge in harsh weather is primarily a formal extension of charity, or a practical community response that varies widely by region and circumstance. In this moment, refuge feels like a set of tiny choices made by people who understand winter. A pointed finger toward a less drafty spot, a cloth adjusted near a door, a quiet tolerance of sleepers. Your third light joke is barely a joke, more of a whisper of relief. You have achieved a level of warmth that can be described as not actively insulting. And that is enough to let your eyelids grow heavy again. You ease back down, careful and slow, and you let sleep approach with its familiar caution. The church remains cold, but you have found ways to argue with the cold without starting a fire or a scandal. You close your eyes and drift into a darker, calmer space, where the only glow you need is the steady and stubborn heat of being alive. You wake to a problem that is both small and dramatic. Your breath has turned your world damp. The inside edge of your cloak near your mouth feels a little stiff, and when you touch it, your fingers meet a crusty chill. Condensation has formed, where your warm breath meets cold fabric, and in a winter church that moisture does not politely disappear. It lingers, and sometimes it freezes. Your first thought is not poetic, it is practical annoyance. You're trying to sleep, not to manufacture tiny ice sculptures with your face. You shift your head slightly so your breath vents into open air rather than into the fold of cloth. You pull the fabric away from your mouth, then immediately miss the warmth of having it close. The solution is a compromise. You keep the cloak near your cheeks but leave a small gap at your lips. You feel ridiculous doing this delicate breathing choreography in the dark, like you are training to be a professional winter breather. That is your first light joke. You have become an artisan of airflow, specializing in the export of warm breath. The cold has other tricks, and your water container, if you have one, feels heavier. And when you shake it gently, it responds sluggishly. Ice is forming, not a full block yet, but enough to make drinking a slow, annoying task. In medieval winters, water can freeze indoors, especially in stone buildings with no sustained heat. The mainstream historical fact here is that in severe cold, even interior spaces like churches can remain near freezing, and water stored in containers can partially freeze, making hydration and basic comfort harder. You hold the container close to your body for a while, letting your core warmth do the work. It is slow. You take a small sip and feel the chill slide down your throat. It is not pleasant, but thirst in winter is sneaky. You can be dehydrated and not feel it sharply until you feel weak. You remind yourself that staying functional matters. You sip again, and your teeth protest. Your teeth, apparently, have opinions. Your boots are another issue. Cold makes leather stiff. If your boots are damp, they stiffen more. You flex your ankles and feel resistance like the boot is arguing back. You do not want to remove them fully, because putting them back on later can become a struggle when leather is rigid and your fingers are slow, but keeping them on can restrict circulation. You loosen a strap slightly. You wiggle toes. You try to keep blood moving without sacrificing the ability to walk when morning comes. You touch your fingertips and feel that they are colder than they should be. You rub them and then stop, because sound carries. Instead, you press them into your armpits, which is not glamorous, but it is effective. Medieval life is full of unglamorous solutions. You also tuck one hand against your belly under your tunic, using your own body as a heat source. It is oddly reassuring, like holding your own warmth in place. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits this frozen water moment. Some medieval people believe that certain blessed objects or prayers can protect travellers from cold-related harm, and there are stories of saints helping someone endure freezing nights. Whether you believe it or not, you can see why such stories spread. Cold is frightening because it is invisible and persistent. A tale of protection offers a sense of control. You might find yourself whispering a short prayer, not as a performance, but as a human reflex. Even skeptics pray when their fingers stop cooperating. Historians still argue whether the medieval experience of winter hardship is amplified in our imagination by dramatic texts and later storytelling, or whether written sources understate the everyday misery because it is too normal to describe. Right now, The misery feels very normal. It is not heroic. It is just a series of small, irritating obstacles. Frozen breath, stiff boots, numb fingers, water that wants to become a solid. You listen to the air. It feels drier than outdoors. Yet the dampness from breath and bodies gathers. In a crowded enclosed space, moisture builds. On cold stone surfaces, it can condense. You notice a faint sheen on a nearby slab, and you wonder if it is moisture or simply the way the candlelight catches the stone. You do not want to slide. Sliding in a church is not dignified. You imagine slipping and making a sound that echoes, and the idea alone makes your stomach tighten. You try to manage your clothing. You check if any part of your cloak is damp. You shift the damp edge away from your face. You tuck a dry fold closer. You rotate fabric like you're rotating food in storage, trying to keep the best parts in use. This is quiet, slow work. You do not have spare garments to swap in and out. You have what you have. Winter teaches you the value of every dry inch of cloth. A sleeper nearby stirs and mutters, then pulls their hood tighter. Their breath puffs into the air. For a moment, you see a cluster of little clouds hanging and dissolving. It looks almost pretty. Then you remember it is moisture and cold doing teamwork, and you stop romanticizing it. That is your second light joke. A sleepy correction. Yes, the breath fog is atmospheric, but it is also your body's way of saying, I am working overtime in here. You feel a cramp in your calf and stretch it gently. The stretch sends a quick spark of pain, then relief. Cold muscles like to tighten, and tight muscles make you feel older than your years. You massage the calf with slow pressure through cloth. You breathe slowly. You do not want to fully wake. You want to solve problems without leaving sleep behind completely, like a person trying to fix a leaking roof without getting out of bed. You notice a faint draft near your face again, and you adjust your position to shield it. Drafts are not just cold. They also dry out skin and make lips crack. You lick your lips and regret it because the moisture cools instantly. You tuck your chin down and breathe through your nose again. Your nose, of course, is now cold. Your nose is a traitor. You decide to cover it lightly with cloth, leaving enough space to breathe. You are now basically building a tiny tent for your face. The cold also affects sound. It makes every little noise feel sharper. A distant bell might sound crisper. A footstep might sound more defined. You hear a faint clink as someone shifts a metal buckle. The sound seems loud. You freeze, then realize nobody reacts. You relax. Your nervous system is simply tuned too high because cold keeps it alert. Here is another quirky tidbit that fits the theme of freezing liquids. In some medieval contexts, people deliberately use snow or ice for practical purposes like cooling and storage, especially for food and drink among wealthier households or institutions. Winter is not only an enemy, it is also a tool when you can control it. But lying on the floor of a church, you are not controlling anything. You are just trying to keep your water from turning into a medieval ice pop. Historians still argue how often ordinary medieval people have access to deliberate ice storage methods, versus only experiencing ice as a seasonal nuisance. The difference might depend on region, wealth, and institution. In this church, ice is mostly nuisance. Your body starts to warm slightly as you settle into a steadier breathing rhythm. You keep your water container near your chest. You keep your hands tucked in warm places. You keep your feet moving just enough. You make peace with the fact that everything is slower in cold. Even thoughts move slower. That can be a blessing. Slowness can feel like calm if you stop fighting it. Your third light joke arrives as a soft thought. You have discovered a new kind of timekeeping. Not hours and bells, but the moment when your water becomes slush and your boots become wooden sculptures. You close your eyes again, and your mind drifts. The cold remains, but you have learned to negotiate with it using small adjustments. You let the church's darkness hold you. You let your breath soften. You let sleep return in small waves, each wave carrying you a little farther from the irritation of frozen fabric and stiff leather, and a little closer to the quiet blankness you came here hoping for. You wake with a hollow feeling that has nothing to do with the cold floor and everything to do with your stomach. Hunger in winter is not just discomfort. It is a warning. Your body burns fuel to stay warm, and if you do not replace that fuel, you start to feel weak, then sluggish, then oddly hopeless. You sit up slowly and try to decide what you can afford to eat, because medieval travel is often a lesson in rationing. You check your pouch or bundle with careful fingers. Bread, if you have it, is hard and dense, the kind that keeps longer but resists your teeth. A bit of cheese might be wrapped in cloth, smelling strong enough to wake the dead, which is helpful because you're trying to stay awake long enough to chew. Maybe a few dried peas or a small onion. If you are lucky, a scrap of salted meat. You do not eat like you're enjoying a feast. You eat like you're feeding a furnace. The mainstream historical fact that settles into this moment is that medieval diets for ordinary people often rely heavily on bread or grains, with limited meat for many, and that winter food can be simpler and more preserved, because fresh produce is scarce. Monastic or church institutions sometimes distribute alms, including bread, to the poor, especially at certain times or as part of charitable practice. Not every church does this every night, but charity is one of the church's public roles, and winter increases need. You decide to eat quietly. Food sounds are surprisingly loud in a stone building. The first bite of hard bread makes your jaw work like it is grinding a tool. You chew slowly, because rushing will hurt your teeth and waste saliva. You break off smaller pieces with your fingers rather than biting directly. Each swallow feels like work. The bread is cold, and cold bread is not comforting. It is functional. You imagine explaining this meal to someone who thinks medieval life is all cozy candles and romantic cloaks. That is your first light joke. Yes. This is the famous medieval feast, featuring the exciting flavour of endurance. You take a small sip of water to help swallow. The water is still cold, but it is at least liquid enough. You keep the container wrapped and close. You do not drink much at once. Too much cold water can chill your core. You take just enough to keep your throat from feeling like parchment. A movement near the entrance catches your eye. Someone is awake, perhaps a local, perhaps another traveller, and they are holding something wrapped in cloth. They move toward a figure sitting near the wall, someone who looks thinner, more worn, more desperate. The cloth bundle opens, and you glimpse bread. The giver speaks softly. The receiver nods, hands trembling slightly as they take it. The exchange is quick, almost practiced. It is charity. But it is also social glue. In winter, giving food is not only kindness. It is a way for a community to keep itself from breaking. Here is a quirky tidbit that slides into your hungry thoughts. In some medieval places, people associate certain foods with protection or luck, like a piece of blessed bread from a feast day or a small crumb kept for a journey. Sometimes people save such food not just to eat, but as a charm. The line between nourishment and talisman is thin when you live close to uncertainty. You look at your own bread and wonder if it is just food or if, in this moment, it is also a kind of promise that you will keep going. Historians still argue how widespread institutional charity truly is in different regions and periods, and how much support comes from formal church structures versus informal neighbour-to-neighbour giving. Watching the bread exchange, you can see how both might be true. The church provides a setting and a moral framework. People provide the actual loaf. Your own hunger makes you pay attention to smells. The air in the church carries faint hints of food from others, not a banquet scent, but little notes, a whiff of onion, a trace of smoked fish, the sour tang of ale on someone's breath. Smell is cruel when you're hungry. It reminds you that everyone has their own rations, and you cannot simply share in them without invitation. You keep your gaze down and your hands close. You do not want to look like you are begging, even if you are. Then you hear a soft voice near you, not loud enough to wake everyone, but directed at you. A question. Simple. Are you in need? The speaker might be a parish helper, someone tasked with distributing a little food to those sheltering inside, or just a person with extra. You answer honestly but modestly. You have some bread. You are managing. You do not want to take from someone who has less. The person nods, and after a pause, they offer you a small piece anyway, perhaps because they see your hands shake, or because they believe charity is not charity if it is only given to the dramatic cases. You accept with gratitude, because refusing too strongly can also be rude. You murmur thanks. You do not make a speech. You tuck the extra piece away to eat slowly later. Your body relaxes a fraction, because having even a small reserve changes everything. It turns panic into planning. That is your second light joke. Gentle and sleepy. You have just received a medieval snack upgrade, and you would like to rate this establishment 5 out of 5 for customer support. You continue eating your own portion slowly. You feel warmth spreading, not from the food's temperature, but from the simple fact of calories entering your system. It is subtle, but real. Your fingers feel slightly less stiff. Your mood steadies. Hunger is a harsh lens. Removing it, even partially, makes the world feel less hostile. You notice that some people eat communally, sharing small bits with family or companions. The sharing is careful. No one wastes. No one laughs loudly. It is a quiet choreography of breaking bread, passing pieces, wiping crumbs with fingers. Even in a church at night, eating is both practical and social. It must be done in a way that does not turn sacred space into a noisy tavern. You also become aware of the moral weight attached to food. Medieval Christianity places importance on charity and almsgiving, and bread in particular carries symbolism. The act of giving bread can feel like participating in the church's moral economy. For the giver, it is a good deed. For the receiver, it can be both relief and a sting of pride. You feel both. You're grateful, and you also feel the small embarrassment of needing help. Winter has a way of stripping pride down to essentials. Historians still argue how much medieval people see charity as a social obligation that reinforces hierarchy, versus a spiritual act that creates genuine mutual care. You can feel that tension even in a small exchange. The giver has power, the receiver has need. Yet the exchange also creates connection. Both things can be true at once. You finish your bread slowly and wipe your fingers on cloth. You do not leave crumbs everywhere. Crumbs attract mice, and mice are already too confident. You tuck away whatever remains. You sip a little water again. You breathe out softly and feel your body settle, a little heavier, a little calmer. Your third light joke comes as you lower yourself back down. You have just completed the medieval version of fine dining, where the chef is winter and the menu is. Chew until you are warm. You lie back on your bedding, hands near your chest, and you let your stomach's slow work become a kind of lullaby. The church remains cold, but your body now has something to burn, and that makes the dark feel less sharp. You close your eyes and drift into a quieter place, where hunger is no longer the loudest voice in the room. You wake to the awareness that the church is not only a building, it is a shared room with strangers, and strangers have moods. You hear a low murmur somewhere in the nave, not prayer this time, but the kind of quiet talk people use when they want to be heard by one person and not by everyone. The sound travels anyway, because stone loves gossip almost as much as it loves echoes. You open your eyes and let them adjust. Shapes resolve into bodies. A traveller sits with knees pulled up, rubbing hands. A local man stands near a pillar, speaking softly to someone seated. A child shifts, half asleep, and the parent adjusts a cloak over them. You can feel a kind of social map forming, invisible lines between people who know each other and people who do not. You are clearly in the category of do not know. That is not dangerous by itself, but it means you must move carefully. The mainstream historical fact underneath this is that medieval communities are tightly knit, and a parish church is a central gathering place where locals recognise faces and notice newcomers. Travel exists, of course, but strangers still stand out, especially in winter when fewer people move around. Hospitality can be offered, but suspicion can also appear quickly, because poverty, theft, and danger are not theoretical. A man near the door coughs and mutters something about the road. Another replies with a short phrase that sounds like advice. You catch a few words, enough to understand they are talking about snow and ruts and a cart that broke an axle. The conversation is not dramatic, it is practical. Like people comparing notes on survival, you listen without staring. Listening is allowed. Staring is not. Someone's eyes land on you. Not hostile, just assessing. You keep your expression neutral and tired. You do not grin like a cheerful tourist. You do not look offended. You look like a person who has walked through cold and needs rest. That is the safest story your face can tell. The observer looks away, a small victory. You exhale. Then you hear a different sound, the scrape of a boot, and a voice that carries a bit more confidence. A man, perhaps older, perhaps simply used to speaking in the church, is making a point to two others. He is not shouting, but he does not whisper either. He gestures with a hand, and the movement makes his sleeve catch candlelight. You cannot hear every word, but you can tell the tone. He is explaining who belongs where, who should be watched, who is allowed to do what. You realize that even on a cold night, even among sleepers, social order is being maintained. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits this atmosphere. In some medieval settings, people develop informal signals to show they are trustworthy. A pilgrim badge, a staff, a token from a known shrine, a letter of passage, even the way someone greets the caretaker can matter. These objects and gestures function like a medieval version of credentials. They do not guarantee safety, but they help. If you have any recognizable marker, you keep it visible enough to be noticed, but not flashy enough to invite theft. Historians still argue how common formal travel documents truly are for ordinary people versus how much identity is established through local networks. Reputation and visual cues like clothing and speech, sitting among strangers. You can feel the power of cues. People read your cloak, your boots, your posture, the way you hold your bag. They decide what kind of person you are without ever asking your name. A young traveller nearby offers you a glance and a small nod. It is not friendship, but it is acknowledgment. You return the nod. The exchange feels like two people agreeing to mutual non-aggression. It is oddly comforting. That is your first light joke. Very quiet. Congratulations. You have just signed a peace treaty with a stranger using only eyebrow movement. A woman rises and moves toward the side aisle, stepping carefully around sleepers. She carries a small bundle, perhaps food, perhaps extra cloth. She pauses near an older man who is awake, sitting with his back against stone. She speaks softly. The older man's shoulders relax. The woman places something in his hands. You cannot see what, but you can guess it is a bit of bread or a strip of cloth. The exchange is gentle, familiar. It suggests they know each other, or at least that she knows his situation. In a village, people track each other's hardships. You become aware of another layer of etiquette, where you place your body when others move around. When someone passes, you pull your feet in. You shift your bundle so it does not block the aisle. You make yourself smaller. This is not just politeness. It is a way of saying, I am not claiming space. I am not a problem. The church is full of people who cannot afford problems. A sudden laugh, quickly stifled, pops out somewhere near the back. Two youths are whispering and trying not to amuse themselves. The laugh is small but bright, like a spark. For a moment, the room feels lighter. Then the laughter stops, because someone older makes a quiet sound of disapproval. The youths settle. Even joy is regulated here. Not because joy is bad, but because noise invites attention, and attention invites trouble. That is your second light joke. Medieval nightlife exists, but it's mostly just whispering and getting gently scolded. You notice how people keep their belongings close. A bag is tucked under a head. A pouch is tied to a belt even while sleeping. A staff is laid within arm's reach. Theft is not constant, but the possibility shapes behaviour. You do the same. You do not clutch your bag like a dragon guarding treasure, but you keep it within reach. You loop a strap around your wrist lightly, not tight enough to cut circulation, just enough to make it harder for someone to lift without you noticing. One of the locals begins speaking to the caretaker, and you catch a few phrases that sound like concern about who is inside tonight. The caretaker responds with a calm tone. You cannot hear the details, but you can sense the caretaker is managing tensions. The church is offering shelter, but shelter can attract conflict if people feel threatened or if resources are scarce. The caretaker's job is partly spiritual, partly security, and mostly patience. Historians still argue whether medieval parish life is more cooperative than conflict-ridden. and how much we should emphasize neighbourly mutual aid versus the sharp edges of suspicion and competition. The truth probably changes depending on year, harvest, and weather. In this cold church, you see both impulses. People share, people watch, people help, people judge. The same person can do all of these. A man near you clears his throat softly and speaks in a low voice, addressing you directly. He asks where you are headed. His tone is not hostile. It is the cautious curiosity of someone who wants to place you in a story that makes sense. You answer simply. You give a destination. You mention a reason, work, family, trade, whatever fits. You do not oversell. You keep it plain. Plain stories are safer. The man nods slowly, and you can feel him deciding you are probably not a threat. Probably. Medieval life loves the word probably. He offers a small piece of advice about the road, a warning about a flooded ford or a stretch where snow drifts. You thank him. The advice is useful, but the exchange is also a ritual. It turns you from unknown to known enough. It is a small bridge. That is your third light joke. Gentle. You have unlocked the medieval dialogue option. Local road tips, simply by looking cold and polite. The murmur of conversation fades again as people settle. Some return to sleep. Some remain awake, staring into dimness, thinking their thoughts. You feel the social map stabilize. You have found your place within it. Not central, not invisible, but tolerated. You lower yourself carefully back onto your bedding. You keep your movements quiet. You keep your breath steady. The church holds the strangers and their stories like a bowl holds water. You are one more story among them, one more body in winter, one more set of lungs breathing out little clouds. You close your eyes and let the presence of others become a strange comfort. Not intimacy, but proof that you're not alone in the night. You wake to a sound that is almost polite, a soft sniff and a restrained cough, the kind of cough someone tries to fold into their sleeve so it will not bother anyone. In winter, sickness does not arrive like a dramatic villain. It arrives like a slow leak, a sore throat, a fever that starts as mild heat and becomes shaking chills, a chest that feels tight. In a church full of sleepers, illness is not an abstract fear. It is a shared risk that hangs in the air with everyone's breath. You sit up a little and scan the dim shapes. A woman is awake, pressing fingers to a child's forehead. The child's face looks flushed even in low light. The woman murmurs something that sounds like reassurance, then reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a bundle of dried plant material wrapped in cloth. She brings it close to the child's nose. The child breathes in, then exhales with a little shudder. The scent drifts faintly toward you. Something herbal, sharp, maybe mint, maybe rosemary, maybe whatever grows locally and survives storage. The mainstream historical fact that steadies this scene is that medieval people use a mix of household remedies, herbal preparations, and religious practices to cope with illness, especially when professional medical help is limited or expensive. Knowledge of herbs exists widely, though it varies by region and social class, and many people rely on traditional mixtures for coughs, fevers, and aches. At the same time, prayer and blessings are deeply woven into healthcare. Not as a separate thing, but as part of the same toolkit. You feel your own throat and notice it's dry. You swallow and feel a slight scratch. It might be nothing. It might be the cold air. It might be the first sign of something. Winter makes every sensation suspicious. You pull your cloak tighter and try to breathe through your nose again. Your nose, as always, is not fully cooperating, but you try. A man nearby clears his throat, then spits quietly into a cloth, trying to be discreet. You do not look directly, because looking directly feels like accusing. Instead, you focus on your own precautions. Keep your face covered lightly. Do not breathe directly into someone else's space. Do not share cups. Do not sit too close unless necessary. You cannot eliminate risk, but you can reduce it. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits the medieval approach to sickness. Many people believe in protective measures that blend practical and spiritual, such as wearing a small charm, carrying a written prayer, or tying a blessed thread around the wrist. Some believe certain stones, medals, or St. images can ward off illness. Others believe strong smells can repel harmful airs. The idea that disease can travel through bad air is common in various forms, and it influences behaviour. People burn fragrant herbs or hold scented cloths near the face, not only for comfort, but as protection. Historians still argue how to interpret medieval explanations of disease, especially ideas about airs and miasma, in relation to observable patterns of contagion. People notice that sickness spreads in crowds, yet they explain it using the frameworks available. Watching the woman with the child, you can sense that observation and belief are intertwined. She uses herbs because they seem to help. She also might whisper a prayer because it feels necessary. Both actions are forms of care. You notice someone making a small sign of the cross after coughing. It is quick, almost automatic. Another person touches their throat and glances toward an image in a side chapel, then looks away. Fear is present, but it is controlled. People do not panic loudly because panic does not help, and because panic is socially disruptive. Instead, they manage fear with routines, herb bundles, cloth coverings, whispered prayers, small gestures. You feel the cold press into your joints and wonder if you are already sore. It is hard to tell. Cold makes everything ache. Still, you decide to take the precautions you can. You keep your hands warm. Cold hands crack. Cracked skin invites infection. And medieval winter has no interest in your comfort. You rub a little oil on your hands if you have any, or you simply keep them inside sleeves. You avoid touching your face unnecessarily. You also shift so you are not directly downwind of someone who is coughing, because airflow inside the church is real, even if you cannot see it. A figure moves through the nave with quiet authority, perhaps the caretaker or someone known locally for tending the sick. They pause near the child and the woman, speak softly, then offer a small item. It might be a cloth, it might be a bit of dried herb, it might be a pinch of salt. The woman nods and thanks them. The exchange is calm. No one expects a miracle cure, but everyone recognizes the value of attention. In winter, attention can be life-saving. That becomes your first light joke, soft and respectful. The medieval healthcare system is a combination of herbs, prayers, and someone who knows how to show up at the right moment. You also notice superstition creeping in, not as a separate category, but as part of coping. Someone mutters about the night being unlucky. Someone mentions a dream. Someone blames a sudden cough on a chill that got into the bones. The explanations are varied. The goal is the same. Make the unknown feel explainable. If you can name a cause, even a symbolic one, you feel less helpless. Here is another quirky tidbit. In some communities, people believe that certain words spoken at the wrong time, or certain actions inside a church, can invite misfortune. They may avoid sweeping at night, avoid whistling, avoid pointing at images, avoid sleeping with feet toward a particular direction. These are not universal rules, and they are not always endorsed by clergy, but they exist as folk logic. Winter nights encourage folk logic. When you cannot control the cold, you try to control something. Historians still argue how much medieval folk practice should be seen as resistance to official religious structures versus a parallel system that comfortably coexists. Inside this church, it looks like coexistence. People pray, people use herbs, people follow small taboos. They do not seem to experience a contradiction. They experience a world where many kinds of protection are allowed. You begin to feel sleepy again, but the awareness of illness keeps you half alert. You listen to breathing. You listen for wheezing. You listen for coughing fits. Your mind does that annoying thing where it starts imagining you are sick simply because you heard someone else cough. You swallow again and feel the scratch. You decide it is just dryness. You decide this firmly because you need to, and because anxiety is also a kind of sickness. You take a small sip of water, then tuck the container back close. You adjust your cloak so it covers your mouth lightly, but not so tightly that moisture builds too much. You rotate the cloth away from your lips. You keep your body in a position that feels safe. Safety is relative, but relative safety is still worth pursuing. A cough erupts from the far side of the nave, louder, more persistent. For a few moments it dominates the soundscape, Then it fades into a wet swallow. The church returns to its hush. Nobody makes a fuss. Nobody rushes over. That might sound cold, but it is also a kind of realism. There are limits to what can be done in the middle of the night. Sometimes the best care is quiet, warmth, and not making the sick person feel watched. That gives you your second light joke. Dry and sleepy. The medieval approach to privacy is so strong that even your cough gets to be anonymous. You notice the candlelight flicker again, and the shadows shift. Your eyes linger on a painted figure in a side chapel, the face calm, the hands raised in blessing. You do not know which saint it is, but you understand the appeal of saints in winter. They are specialized hope. Someone for fevers, someone for travellers, someone for children, someone for lungs. In a world where medicine is uncertain, spiritual specialization is comforting. Historians still argue whether saints' cults spread primarily through genuine local devotion and reported miracles, or through social networks, patronage, and the church's own promotion. Sitting here, you suspect again that both are true. People believe because they need to believe. They also believe because belief is part of community. Your third light joke arrives as you settle down. If you make it through this night without catching anything, you might start a cult of your own. Dedicated to the patron saint of staying quietly in your blanket, you let your eyes close, you let your breath slow. You accept that risk exists, and you accept that you are doing what you can. In the cold, in the dim, surrounded by the soft sounds of living bodies, you drift towards sleep again, carrying the faint herbal scent in your mind like a small, stubborn shield. You wake to a pale change in the darkness. Not light exactly, but a thinning of shadow. Dawn is arriving in the slow medieval way, like someone turning up a lamp one careful notch at a time. The church windows, high and narrow, begin to show a faint grey, and the blackness inside becomes a softer charcoal. Your body notices immediately. Your body has been waiting for permission to stop enduring and start functioning. You try to sit up, and you discover that your joints have formed opinions overnight. Your knees creak. Your back feels stiff. Your neck protests like it has been sleeping on a rock, because it has been sleeping on something morally equivalent to a rock. You roll your shoulders slowly and feel pins and needles spread into your arms. It is not injury. It is the simple result of cold and hard surfaces. Still, it makes you move cautiously, as if you are an old door that needs oil. The mainstream historical fact tied to this dawn moment is that medieval daily life often begins early, especially in rural settings, with morning prayers, chores, and travel time to daylight. Churches play a role in marking time, and morning services or bell signals can shape the village rhythm. Even without a loud bell, the light itself is a signal. Day has arrived, and with it comes expectation. You look around and see others waking too. A traveller sits up and massages feet. A local woman shakes out a cloak and checks on her child. Someone yawns widely, then covers their mouth quickly, as if yawning is too intimate for sacred space. The whole room is doing a quiet reset. People gather belongings with the careful efficiency of those who do not own much and cannot afford to lose anything. You stand, slowly, and the blood rushes to your legs with a dizzy little wave. You steady yourself with a hand on your own knee rather than on church furniture. You do not want to lean on anything sacred or fragile. Your boots feel stiff. Your fingers feel clumsy. You flex them. You stamp lightly once. Then stop because it sounds too loud. Your body wants to stomp like a modern person warming up, but the church demands a softer style of mourning. A thin beam of light falls across the floor from a window, and it reveals details you did not see in full darkness. The stone has little scratches and chips. The straw bedding looks messier than you thought. A few crumbs glitter like tiny sins. You quickly brush them up. Morning light is honest. It exposes everything, including your questionable sleeping arrangement. That is your first light joke. Daylight has arrived to review your interior decorating choices, and it is not impressed. You also notice faces more clearly now. A man's beard is rimmed with frost from breath. Someone's cheeks are red and chapped. A child's hair sticks up in strange angles from sleeping under a cloak. People look worn but familiar with this state. In winter, you often start the day already tired. You do not get a fresh version of yourself. You get a used version that must still work. A caretaker moves through the nave, checking that the space is being left orderly. They do not bark commands. They simply exist as a reminder that the church is not a campsite. You respond by tidying. You gather straw into a neat pile if it is meant to be reused. You shake your cloak gently outside your immediate area to remove bits of straw, then stop because even that makes noise. You do it again, slower. You fold the cloak with care. Folding is a silent form of respect. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits the morning. In some places, people believe that the first light in a church has special purity, and that prayers said at dawn carry particular weight. Dawn is a liminal time, neither night nor full day, and medieval people often attribute meaning to liminal times. You might see someone pause near a side chapel, whisper a quick prayer, then straighten up as if they have just reset their soul for the day. Whether or not dawn is truly special, it feels special when you have been cold all night. Light feels like mercy. Historians still argue how much daily religious practice among ordinary people is driven by personal devotion versus social expectation. Dawn in a church makes it hard to separate the two. A person might pray because they want to. A person might pray because everyone can see them. Both motivations can live in the same body without conflict. People are complicated. Winter makes them even more complicated. You become aware of your own appearance, hair flattened, face dry, cloak rumpled. You do what you can with minimal fuss. You smooth your hair with fingers. You rub your face lightly to bring blood back. You check that your belt is secure. You make sure you do not look like you have been rolling around like a loose sack of grain. Looking respectable matters, not because you are vain, but because respectability reduces suspicion. In a village, someone will notice you in daylight. Night hides, morning reveals. You feel a craving for warmth again, but dawn offers a different kind of warmth, direction. You can leave. You can move. Movement will warm you. You can find a hearth somewhere, or at least a sheltered path. The thought alone makes your chest loosen. You are not trapped in cold stillness. You can become active. A small sound, perhaps a bell, perhaps a wooden clapper, marks a morning moment. People shift, some standing, some kneeling briefly. If a priest appears, they might begin a short service or blessing. The tone is different from the night. Morning has purpose. Morning is for starting. That gives you your second light joke. Very gentle. The sunrise is basically the medieval reset button, and you are pressing it with both hands because you would like your knees back. Please. You notice how the church looks different in daylight. Not warm, but less mysterious. The carvings are visible. The painted surfaces show colour. The scale of the space feels less threatening and more impressive. It is a communal room again, not a night cavern. You see repairs, wear, small signs of use. You realise the church is maintained by people who live with it daily, not by an abstract institution. The building is both sacred and practical, and daylight makes the practicality easier to see. You step carefully toward the entrance area. Your boots scrape lightly. You pause and listen for reactions. None. People are busy gathering themselves. You keep your head slightly bowed as you pass certain areas, not out of dramatic piety, but out of habit. Habit is the glue of medieval life. Historians still argue whether the emotional impact of medieval church architecture is primarily intended to inspire awe and obedience, or whether it also provides genuine psychological comfort by offering a stable, familiar space amid hardship. In morning light, you can feel comfort more clearly. The church is cold, but it is steady. It has held you through the night. It holds others too. That steadiness has meaning. Your third light joke arrives as you reach the door. You're about to step back into the world looking like a person who slept on straw in a stone building. Which is exactly what happened. So at least your appearance is honest. You gather your belongings, check straps, and pull your cloak into place. You take one last look across the nave, now softly lit, and you feel a quiet gratitude that is not dramatic. It is simple. You are awake. You're moving. You are alive. Dawn has arrived, and with it comes the permission to begin again. You step into the church's morning mood and realize there is a final task that has nothing to do with warmth and everything to do with obligation. Shelter is rarely free in the medieval world, even when it is given as charity. Payment can be coin, yes, but it can also be labour, courtesy, and the quiet agreement that you will not take more than you should. You adjust your cloak and look for the person who seems responsible, because leaving without acknowledgement would feel like stealing, even if no one physically stops you. Near the side aisle, the caretaker speaks with a couple of locals. Their posture says authority without swagger. They keep the space orderly, and that order is part of what makes shelter possible. You approach slowly, not rushing, not cutting into conversations, waiting for a pause like a person who respects time. When the caretaker turns to you, you offer a nod and a simple thanks. In this setting, gratitude is not decoration. It is the social glue that keeps charity from turning into resentment. The mainstream historical fact woven into this moment is that medieval churches and parishes often function as hubs of local administration and charity, supported by tithes, donations, and community labour. The idea of almsgiving is central to Christian practice, but resources are still finite, and communities manage them through expectations and norms. A traveller may be helped, but the traveller is also expected to behave and, when possible, to contribute in some way. You reach into your pouch and consider what you can give. A small coin might be enough. It might be all you have. If you have no coin, you can offer labour, like sweeping, carrying water, or helping move benches. Even a short task signals respect. You do not want to leave the impression that you used the church as a free hostel and vanished. You want to leave a trail of goodwill, because goodwill can matter more than money when you are moving through unfamiliar places. You offer the caretaker a coin if you can. You place it gently in their hand rather than dropping it into a box like you're tossing feed to an animal. The caretaker's face remains neutral, but you see the small recognition in their eyes. If you cannot offer coin, you offer to sweep. You gesture toward the scattered straw and dust. The caretaker gives a small nod, and you begin. Sweeping in a medieval church is not glamorous, but it is meaningful. The broom is rough, made of bundled twigs, and it makes a dry scratching sound across stone. You sweep slowly, collecting straw and crumbs into a neat pile. You're careful near rails and furnishings. You avoid touching sacred objects. You move like someone who understands that a careless bump can become a story. As you sweep, you notice how much the building depends on constant small maintenance. The church is not a static monument. It is a space that must be cared for daily. That becomes your first light joke. Quiet and affectionate. You came for shelter and ended up with a morning job, which means the medieval economy has successfully recruited you. A local woman passes and gives you a brief glance that feels approving. Not warm praise, just acknowledgement that you're doing the right thing. Another person steps around your pile and nods. These tiny gestures matter. They turn you from a stranger taking charity into a stranger participating in the community's order. In a small village, order is safety. Here is a quirky tidbit that slips into the idea of obligation. In some medieval communities, people believe that giving to the church or working for it brings not only social approval but spiritual benefit, even protection on the road. A gift can be seen as an offering, and an offering can be seen as insurance. In a world where insurance is mostly prayer and luck, you might find yourself feeling a strange comfort in doing the labour, not because it is fun, but because it feels like you are balancing a scale. Historians still argue whether medieval charity is best understood primarily as genuine compassion, or as a system that reinforces hierarchy and control. As you sweep, you can feel both. The church offers shelter, but it also sets rules. The caretaker decides who stays and who does not. Donations and labour help maintain that system, yet at the same time, you are here, alive, because someone chose to allow you in. Compassion and control can share the same roof. When you finish sweeping, you gather the straw into a bundle and carry it to where the caretaker indicates. Your arms ache slightly, but the movement warms you. Your breath becomes steadier. You feel more like yourself, not because you are comfortable, but because you are active and useful. Usefulness is a kind of dignity. The caretaker thanks you with a brief phrase. They do not make a big ceremony of it. Medieval gratitude is often practical. They might also remind you of something, like a path to take, or a way to avoid a flooded stretch, or a place where travellers sometimes find work. Advice is another currency. You listen closely. Information on winter roads can be more valuable than coin. You also notice a small wooden box for offerings, perhaps near the entrance. Some people drop coins, some drop small items. A few might leave a candle stub or a bit of wax. You see that giving takes many forms. A poor person might give almost nothing, but they still give something, even if it is a prayer or a gesture. A wealthier person might give more and make sure it is seen. The church absorbs all of it and turns it into maintenance, rituals, and support. That inspires your second light joke. Very mild. The donation box is basically the medieval subscription model, except the perks include spiritual reassurance and a roof. You become aware of obligations you cannot pay with coin. You must leave the space as you found it, or better, you must not carry off anything, not even by accident. You check your belongings and make sure you have not picked up someone else's cloth. You glance at the floor for stray items, a lost glove, a dropped bead, a small pin. If you find something, you hand it to the caretaker. That act, too, builds trust. Trust is the real bridge between stranger and community. Historians still argue how much medieval travel relies on formal hospitality networks versus improvised kindness from locals. The truth seems to depend on where you are and who you meet. In this church, hospitality is structured by rules, but it still requires human willingness, the caretaker's patience, the local's tolerance, the shared understanding that winter can make anyone needy. You adjust your belt and prepare to go. You feel the weight of your bundle. You feel the stiffness in your shoulders easing slightly from movement. You also feel a subtle shift in how people look at you. Not as an intruder, not as a mystery, more like a passing presence who did not cause trouble. In medieval life, that is a high compliment. Your third light joke arrives as you step away from the swept area. You have completed your stay with no scandals, no fires, and only minimal mouse-related drama, which is an achievement worth engraving on a stone plaque somewhere. You give the caretaker one last nod and a quiet thanks. You do not linger. Lingering can become awkward. You move toward the door with measured steps, ready to return to the winter world carrying the invisible payment you have made. Coin or labour. Yes, but also good manners, restraint, and the understanding that shelter is a relationship, not a product. You step toward the door and feel the air change even before it opens. The church holds cold, but the outside winter has a sharper edge, a bite that feels more personal. The caretaker works the latch, and the thick door shifts with a low groan. A thin blade of daylight slices in, pale and wintry, and the smell of the outdoors rushes forward. Snow, damp earth, wood smoke from distant hearths, and that clean, metallic scent that cold air always seems to carry. You move through the doorway with your bundle close, and the first breath outside makes your lungs tighten. The air is colder than you want it to be, but it is also fresh, and there is a strange relief in it. The sky is as dull, winter blue, and the sun is low, reluctant, as if it is unsure whether it wants to bother showing up today. Frost coats the ground, turning every footprint into a small, fragile sculpture. Your boots crunch softly, and the sound feels loud only because the morning is quiet. The mainstream historical fact that lives in this moment is that medieval winter travel is difficult and often slow, with roads becoming muddy, icy, or blocked by snow, and with daylight limited, making planning crucial. Villages cluster around resources and routes, and the church often stands as a landmark, visible from a distance. Stepping away from it, you realize how much it anchors the landscape. It is not just a building, it is a point of orientation. Even if you never come back, it has served as a marker in your map of survival. You take a few steps and then stop, because your body needs a moment to adjust. Moving warms you, but the first movements also reveal stiffness you did not fully notice while lying still. You rotate your shoulders, you flex your hands, your fingers ache, then slowly loosen. You check your boots again, tugging a strap. making sure nothing has frozen into an unhelpful shape. You feel the small thrill of being able to move freely, even if the world is still cold. A villager passes on the lane, wrapped in a cloak, carrying a bundle of sticks. They give you a quick glance and a nod that is neither friendly nor unfriendly, simply the acknowledgement of one winter survivor to another. You return it. You do not wave like an excited visitor. You nod like a person who understands that everyone is busy keeping life going. That is your first light joke. Quiet and dry. You have joined the local club called Walking Around Pretending This Temperature is Normal. You look back once at the church. In daylight, it looks less mysterious and more solid. The stonework clear, the roofline sharp against the sky. You notice a small cross at the top, simple and steady. You feel a flicker of gratitude again. Not dramatic, just human. Then you turn away, because lingering in winter is how you invite your own misery. Here is a quirky tidbit that fits the act of leaving. In some medieval traditions, travellers perform small protective gestures at thresholds, such as making a brief sign of the cross, touching a charm, or speaking a short prayer for safe roads. Even people who do not think of themselves as superstitious may do it, because the gesture costs little and offers comfort. You might find your hand rising almost automatically, then dropping again, and you might feel silly for a heartbeat. Then you remember that winter is not the time for pride. Historians still argue how deeply such everyday gestures are rooted in church teaching versus older folk habits that persist through generations. The gesture, whatever its origin, functions as a mental reset. It marks the transition from sheltered space to exposed road. It tells your mind, now you're moving again. You set off along the lane. The ground is hard with frost, and each step produces a small crunch. In places where the sun touches, the frost begins to soften, turning into slick patches. You walk carefully, because slipping on ice is not heroic. It is simply embarrassing and potentially painful. You keep your balance by holding your bundle close and letting your feet find steady ground. You scan for ruts, for stones, for places where water might have frozen into a thin sheet. As you walk, you notice the village waking. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin columns. A dog trots along, nose down, ignoring you with professional focus. Somewhere a rooster decides to be loud, because roosters never miss a chance to announce existence. That becomes your second light joke. The rooster is clearly convinced it is the reason the sun shows up, and nobody has corrected it. You pass a small field edged by a low fence, and the grass is white with frost. A cart stands near a shed, wheels rimmed with ice. You imagine the work ahead for the people who live here, feeding animals, hauling water, chopping wood, mending gas, cooking, praying, repeating. Winter does not pause. It demands routine. You realize that sleeping in the church is only one thread in a larger fabric of winter endurance shared by everyone. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced winter primarily as a season of communal hardship that strengthens social bonds, or as a season that sharpens inequality by exposing who has the resources and who does not. Walking through the village, you can see both. Some homes leak warmth into the air through smoke and light. Others look dark and tight shut. Some people carry full bundles. Others carry nothing but themselves. Winter reveals the shape of a community. You feel your body warming from movement. Not truly warm, but functional. Your fingers loosen. Your breath becomes less sharp. Your thoughts slow into a steady rhythm with your steps. The road stretches ahead, and you begin to think about the practical details, where to find food, where to rest, where to avoid. You recall any advice you've heard and try to arrange it in your mind like a small map. Then you notice your footprints behind you, crisp in the frost. Each one is a mark that will vanish later when the sun rises higher or when the wind shifts. That is your third light joke. Soft and reflective. You are leaving a trail that is both evidence and temporary art, the medieval version of posting your location. But for birds and weather, you keep walking, and the church recedes behind you. The winter world opens ahead, quiet, pale, and demanding. Yet you carry something internal now that is hard to name. It is not bravery exactly. It is a familiarity with discomfort, a sense that you can handle a night of cold stone and still stand up and walk. That knowledge sits in your chest like a small coal, not hot, but steady. You breathe in and let the cold air fill you. You breathe out and watch your breath drift away. You let your shoulders settle. You walk in a calm, unhurried way, because haste in winter leads to mistakes. The road is not kind, but it is there, and you are moving. The village sounds fade. The crunch of your boots becomes the main rhythm again. The sky brightens by a fraction. The sun remains low, but it exists, and that is enough. You keep going, one step after another, carrying quiet lessons in your muscles and a steady patience in your breath. And now, as the scene softens, you let the road blur gently at the edges. You let the frost on the fields become less sharp in your mind. You let the chimney smoke drift upward and thin into the winter sky. Your steps slow in imagination even if they continue on the path. You feel your body relax in the safety of listening, not travelling. The cold becomes a distant concept rather than a sharp sensation. The church becomes a quiet shape behind you, not a place to return to, just a solid memory of shelter. You take a long, easy breath. You release it slowly. You imagine your hands warming near an unseen hearth, your shoulders unclenching, your jaw loosening. The winter road continues somewhere out there, but you do not need to walk it right now. You only need to rest. Your breathing grows steadier, softer. The crunch of boots becomes a gentle, fading rhythm. The morning light turns creamy and calm. The world feels quiet and safe in your mind, as if the cold cannot reach you here. You let your eyelids grow heavy. You let the last images drift. A pale sky, a frosted field, a steady road, and your own calm breath moving in and out like a slow tide. End of script. Sweet dreams.